Hi, I'm Dave Norton. I'm the founder and principal of Stone Mantle, and today I want to talk a little bit about the book I just wrote called Human Context: How Intelligent Companies Build Customers. I've been doing customer research now for 25 years, and this book is an important part of my thinking for a long time. This book grew out of concern that I had that the way that we were talking about artificial intelligence and what it means for business was headed in the wrong direction. I believe over the next decade, context is going to be the driving force behind the types of technologies and the types of experiences that people are going to expect and want and demand. So let's jump in. Let's get kind of started here. I've broken this presentation down into three parts. Part one is the argument about AI, how people are talking about it today, and what needs to change if we want the discourse to be more human-centric. Part two is all about applying the frameworks from the book. It's about thinking about situational markets, about modes, time value, and stupid, dumb, smart, genius. Part three, we want to take one solution, and this particular solution is not the most flashy tech solution ever, and apply the principles to the solution. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We'll start with the argument about AI. First of all, let's start with a term that you probably are familiar with, the context window. If you've used ChatGPT or Claude, one of the first things the tool asks you to do is to upload files, build a folder, make whatever material you want it to use available to it. That folder plus all the back and forth of the conversation is the context window. It's not the same thing as what the model was trained on, but it is the data supplied by the company or by the individual so that the model can generate a better response. It's genuinely powerful, and I never could have imagined back in 2015 when I wrote Digital Context 2.0 that this kind of a solution would exist. The thing that we're going to be talking about is human context. And human context is not the same thing as a context window. It's the person's situational reality, the situation that they're in, the mode that they're operating in, and it exists whether or not the system reads it. Here's the definition that Anthropic uses to describe context today. The context window refers to all the text the language model can reference when generating a response. And here's the definition I wrote back in 2015 when we called it digital context, because everything back then was digital. It's a bit of a historical artifact of the time. Digital context, I wrote, is an integrated, smart group of channels that closes the gap between customers' thoughts and their actions. Now pay attention to the difference between the two. One definition describes what's being extracted from the environment to make the model more successful. The other describes what the tool does to empower the consumer to act. That's the language that anybody focused on customer centricity or experiences or transformations ought to be using. It's what designing was supposed to be about all along, understanding the situation the person is actually in. There are at least three things that I think companies need to be paying attention to when it comes to human context. And we'll go deep around each one of these. First, there's a common situation that people find themselves in. And we need to describe what it is. We need to be able to define it and understand why it matters. Second, there's the mode that the person is. There's no shortage of human behaviors out there, but a mode is what a consumer gets into that is the most important part of human context. And third is time value. That's what the person actually is trying to produce from the interaction. Are they trying to speed things up? Are they trying to slow things down? Are they trying for some kind of transformation. Once you have these three elements, situation, mode, time value, you can do a lot for the customer. The fourth framework in this book is the 4 levels of intelligence, otherwise known as the stupid, dumb, smart, genius framework. Let's talk a little bit about intelligence, because genius solutions are becoming the norm. And every time a new technology enters somebody's world, it resets their expectations. My own expectations have changed dramatically. I close all of my books for Stone Mantle now using Claude. It's not necessarily that Claude does it better than my accountant, but I can do things I never could before. What we're seeing is that consumers are starting to distinguish between different types of solutions. Some solutions carry no context whatsoever. I buy a hammer a nail, it gets the job done. I don't need it to remember anything about me. Nothing wrong with that. That's dumb, and I don't mean that as an insult. As soon as you start to introduce intelligence, people start to distinguish between dumb solutions and smart solutions. A smart solution responds to your input, learns your preferences, gets better over time. We're used to that now. Nobody buys a thermostat today that isn't smart in some way, shape, or form. Where we're headed, and this is what we predicted back in 2017 when we first started mapping out levels of intelligence, is that consumers are starting to understand what genius looks like. A genius solution truly understands context and can anticipate the need. And that changes everything. Your business model, whether people are willing to pay you, how they're willing to pay you. A smart solution almost always comes with a subscription. Nobody blinks an eye at that anymore. A genius solution, people won't blink an eye at a subscription either, but they'll expect to pay for tokens, for outcomes. The business model is going to be different. So for example, let's take a pair of glasses. Now, for 750 years, glasses have done one thing: correct vision. It was that one job to get done. Then we started adding things to glasses, audio controls, voice controls, hearing aids that made those glasses smart. In 2013, you might remember that Google introduced Google Glass, and the response from consumers was rejection. They hated Google Glass. Why? Because it collected all of this data, all of this contextual data, which was then used for surveillance, for serving up ads, for doing things that were considered by the customer to be stupid. And that's the big difference between stupid and dumb. Stupid is working against the customer. There's contextual data, but it's working against the customer. Now, recently, Ray-Ban introduced Ray-Ban Meta glasses. One hopes that they will eventually become genius glasses that will support the customer the way the customer wants to be supported. But the important thing is that within one product category, all 4 levels of intelligent experiences are demonstrated. So let's go a little bit deeper into these different categories because they're going to matter going forward. Level 1, stupid. It's intelligence aimed the wrong way. Stupid is adversarially intelligent. It's not that there isn't any intelligence, it's that the intelligence was built for the company, not for the customer. It's built to sell the customer more, to push them towards something they didn't actually want. The customer shares their data hoping for a better experience, and what they get back is a pile of ads, right? That's what we mean by stupid. It's interesting that 71% of retailers believe they excel at personalization, while only 34% of their customers agree. That's because a lot of personalization technology is actually stupid. Level 2, dumb. Dumb simply means there is no context. Think about the resurgence of vinyl records. There's something beautiful about playing a record player. Nobody expects it to learn about them, and that's perfectly fine. You can build a whole niche and still stay dumb. The test is simple. Does the intelligence make the product better for the person buying? If the intelligence only serves your data strategy and not the customer's daily life, stay dumb and be honest about it. The back office can be as intelligent as you want it to be. The experience doesn't have to be. Level 3, smart. Smart is not the same as genius. Smart responds to inputs, it learns your histories. This is what most personalization tools do today. They're essentially running Bayesian algorithms that allow them to look back at your past preferences, what you chose, and then try to predict what you will want next based on your preferences. What smart can't do is see what's actually going on in a specific situation. So in this visual here, you've got all this preference data, but it doesn't actually tell you what's going on tonight. It doesn't tell you how to support the individual in the situation that they find themselves in. You might be able to anticipate some things, but because it can't explain the situation, it's not smart enough to do genius level work. The last level is genius. And I love this example. This is something that I found from some research while I was researching the book. I came across this. It's a model for aviation safety security. And there are basically 3 levels. There's perception, seeing what's there, understanding the situation. There's comprehension, understanding what it means. And then there's projection, or anticipating what happens next. What genius does is all of the above. It's able to perceive the situation, something that smart isn't able to do. It's able to comprehend and to project. So in this example, the navigation app did not wait to be opened. It read the calendar, it understood what was going on, and was able to tell the guy that he had a few more minutes. He had 40 more minutes that he could spend having breakfast with his wife. That's genius. That's great. Now, somebody's always going to ask me, but what about trust? Will they trust AI enough? The reason why people don't trust AI is the same reason they don't trust sharing data 15 years ago when we first started studying data sharing. It's because the data isn't being used for what the customer needs. You can capture everything into the context window, but if that data serves only the company's purposes, trust erodes and people stop sharing. People don't have to share their data. They need to get the tool to actually close the gap between their intentions and actions. That's why they keep sharing. But the return has to be felt. A customer who reads a privacy policy doesn't feel trust. A customer who gains 40 minutes on a Tuesday morning does. And that's the big difference. When we think about the dominant question that people are asking about AI today, it almost always is, what can AI do better than a person? Can it close my books better than my accountant? Probably not, honestly. But that's the wrong question. The real question is, what can people do because of AI? I still have a relationship with my accountant. Now the two of us have a tool between us, and both of us can do more because we have Claude. That's the opportunity. Closing the books is the task. My accountant and my money are the relationship that I'm building, and that's where human context really thrives. All right, that's my argument about AI. Now let's talk about the frameworks in the book and how you might actually apply them on a Monday morning. The book basically describes the why you need to focus on situations, why you need to focus on modes. It gives you the introduction to the frameworks. But I learned from the last book that I wrote that people would want very specific examples to help them. oftentimes I had people come up to me and basically say, hey, I really like your book, but I don't see how it applies to my particular category. So this time I've written workbooks, one workbook for each of a number of categories. These are the first 10 categories that I've written workbooks for. I'll continue to write more workbooks as needed. Now, they cost more than the book because they have a lot of data in them. They show you how to actually use the models to build your own strategies. But I would encourage you to make sure that you get the book and the workbook that's best for you. All right, let's go deeper around the three concepts of human context: situations, modes, and time value. We're going to talk about situations as where you show up. Mode detection, we're going to talk about as how to show up. And with time value, we're going to use that to help us assess whether or not the solution we've created is actually working in some way, shape, or form. All right, so what is a situational market? It's a common market you can target as a company and support with a solution the company will actually embrace. One of the big things that has changed since 2015 is that people can access almost anything they need instantly. That means the market is everywhere, always present. So we're going to move you off of a tried and true approach for markets of demographics and psychographics and towards something we call a when statement. So when I'm a parent executing a morning routine and I'm under pressure, that's more realistic. It's how people actually behave. Nobody wants you talking to them like they're a 35-year-old suburban woman with a household income above $80,000. They want you responding to their morning routine and their time pressure. Every time you use demographics, you're shrinking the actual size of the market, which is anyone who has a need in a particular moment. Imagine if Google had decided only academics do research and built search only for them. Doesn't that sound ridiculous? But that's the logic of traditional segmentation. Same person, Saturday afternoon, is hosting a planning meal. Sunday evening, they're transitioning from the weekend to the work week. It's the same demographic, but now you've got 3 different markets that you can go after. And those markets are actually very, very big. So here's some data from the banking workbook that I mentioned earlier. We identified 21 situations in the category and sized every one of them. Now, some of these situations are obvious. When my paycheck just hit, but rent, bills, and the credit card will eat most of it over the weekend. I estimate that that happens about 3.6 billion times per year. That's a massive market, and it's one that a lot of companies already pay attention to because it's obvious. The bigger opportunity is usually in the 6 less obvious situations. When I'm trying to figure out if this side hustle is actually making me money, there are 98 million people in the United States alone who have a side hustle right now. What are banks doing about that particular situation? And then there's a third tier. These are externally driven situations: inflation, a war overseas, buy now, pay later, taking off. All of these things, once you start thinking about situational markets, you can respond to those macro shifts instead of waiting to see if your demographic is eventually going to catch up. Here's the same type of thinking applied to a different category: health and well-being. The obvious situations are already designed for: taking a morning medication, an annual checkup reminder. The less obvious ones are where almost nothing is built. When the day ends and I realize I haven't had a real conversation with anyone. That's 19.5 billion occasions per year. That's a huge market. We can look for the triggers, the clues, the context that tells us someone has gone through an entire day without talking to another person. That wasn't detectable in the past, but it's possible today, and we can create solutions to support them. This is why you size the situations before you run a single piece of research. Frequency data tells you where the volume actually is. It turns the map into an investment tool, not just an insight deck. Look at where the highest frequency situations sit next to the weakest current response. That's where the opportunity is concentrated. And it's usually not where the obvious attention already is. And again, we do this work in the workbooks. We show you how to do this particular type of activity. Prioritization. Also in the workbooks. The workbooks help you to think about different horizons because not every situation is the same each year, and you need to be projecting forward and thinking about future situations that your customers get into. Some situations you can activate against in the next 12 to 18 months. Others take 2 or 3 years or longer to properly support. And so you need to be able to prioritize based on strategic horizons. We're not trying to just react to whatever's happening in the market. We're trying to anticipate situations that people will find themselves in down the road. Now, let's talk about modes. I first started talking about modes back in 2013, and at the time, nobody knew what I meant. I could ask any of you right now what crisis mode is, and you'd be able to describe it to me. Things have changed dramatically. We all went through COVID together, and modes is the language that people already use to describe their own behavior. I'm in a mode right now. I'm talking to you. I'm kind of in workshop mode, right? This is not necessarily how I always respond. Companies to this day still don't design for the modes that their customers get in very well. Now, a mode is not a habit. A habit is a repeatable pattern of behavior. A mode is not a moment. A moment is a period of time. It's not a mood. A mood is a feeling that you have that comes over you, and it's not a preference. A preference is a kind of a past-facing type of thing. This is what I wanted in the past. A mode is something that you're in right now. Now, the relationship between a situation and a mode is kind of the relationship between a ballpark and a batter. The situation kind of describes the environment that the person finds themselves in, but one person can be in 3 different modes depending upon other factors that are going on. For example, they could be in anxious mode, chronic management mode, or caregiving mode, all associated with picking up a prescription late at night. If the situation is the ballpark and the mode is the batter at bat, then what we have to do is figure out how to identify those clues that tell us what mode they're actually in. One of the things that we help you build in the workbooks, and we touch on in the book, is something I think matters more to companies today than a journey map. It's a mode map. For any given situation, it shows the likelihood that your consumer actually gets into that particular mode. If it's likely and they do get into it, then that's something that you should and can probably design for, something you can go after with the data to back you and support you. The 4th concept in the book is one I've been talking about for a long time, though there's a lot of new material now in the book. The basic principle: people who have access to powerful tools, who can do almost anything at the drop of a hat, measure the value of a solution based on whether it's worth their time. Not how much they spent, not their stated preferences, not whether they recommended you. That's definitely a company metric, not a customer metric. And we can break worth your time into 3 categories. There is time well saved, which is exactly what it sounds like, getting more done in less time. There's time well spent, which is about enjoying the time itself and maybe wanting it to last a little longer. And then there's time well invested, which often is associated with some kind of personal transformation, becoming more capable because of it. And then, of course, there's the 4th category, which is time wasted. Time wasted will connect directly to stupid solutions. If a solution is adversarially intelligent, the customer experiences it as a waste of time every single time. If you want to see how all of these pieces work together, here's the one-pager. The when statement tells you the recurring circumstance. Size the when statement and you have your situational market. The mode tells you what the person is willing to receive from you right now. The stupid, dumb, smart, genius level tells you the type of system you're going to support them with. And if it's dumb, that's fine, but say so. And time value tells you whether you've built something actually worth their time. Now let's talk about the scope that these frameworks can do for any type of company. When you start to apply these principles, it affects marketing, it affects experience in CX, it affects, of course, AI, technology, innovation. Across the board, any decision that has to be made that involves a fundamental understanding of the customer is going to be impacted by these frameworks. If you're doing segmentation strategy, situational segmentation will outperform demographic situation, full stop. If you're doing journey mapping, you can map based on situations and modes instead of one persona's path. And you can prioritize your feature roadmap based on situational frequency and tier, not the loudest feature request or just matching a competitor. And that takes us to part 3. I wanted to use this case study because it's genuinely interesting to me. It represents an extreme example of how to apply these principles. This company, still in 2026, doesn't even have an app, but it's very successful. It has a retail approach at providing microloans. What they realized was that their referral program was their most successful marketing tool for getting new customers. And so they determined to take what was a successful referral program and make it even more, dramatically more successful. Let me talk a little bit about the program itself. It wasn't broken. It was one of the larger advocate programs in their particular category, tens of thousands of funded loans per year. The cost per funded loan was well below the category benchmark. They had a double-digit multiple on their program spend, all great things, and finance had really no reason to look at it twice. But they wanted much more. And our analysis found that there were over 246 million high-frequency situations per year where referrals could happen within their footprint. So we went and identified the specific situations where people would be actually willing to share. We sized the incidences, the annual volume, and described each one in detail. Things like when someone is waiting on a paycheck or a refund or a reimbursement and need a short-term bridge, or when someone is worried about being judged for needing help and wants a partner that treats them with respect. We did the analysis around each one the same way we do it for any other category. Very specific. We're not trying to design for the entire company. We're just trying to design for this referral program. Instead of talking about modes, we decided to use the language of roles. And we identified 3 modes that people could and would get into, called them roles. One was as an experience guide, the other was as a trust curator, and the third was as a rhythm keeper. Now you can imagine that one person could be in any one of those roles, but we're going to support them with the right messaging tied to the role, tied to the situation to ensure the right motivation for the referral. Because as you saw in one of the earlier slides, they had a lot of people that were doing self-referrals, and we wanted to kind of mitigate that particular element. And we also wanted to increase the number of referrals. So they still don't have an app. This is a 3 to 4 year rollout, and it's early days, but we're already seeing self-share rates down 81%, which is fantastic. We're seeing genuine advocacy start to show up, and the conversion rate is climbing. I don't want to suggest situational market analysis did all that. They have great creative and a really strong program, and we built all of those things, but we can already project an additional 27% increase in their referral rate over the next 5 years against their current trajectory. This is coming from a company who's at the dumb extreme in terms of technology, but we're applying the same thinking and seeing a bigger market and a more relevant message for something as specific as a referral program. So where do you get started if you want to do this in your own organization? The first thing you want to do is you want to identify 21 situations to build for. I have a whole chapter in the book on why 21. Then figure out which modes you should be focused on, and then decide what kind of time value you're actually trying to produce. You can do that work yourself. Read the book, get it. It'll walk you through the frameworks. You can map out your situations, get a license for one of the workbooks from our website. It's on our website. Go to www.stonemantle.co. We can help you at Stone Mantle with any of these activities, help you to audit a particular investment. This will get you started, and I hope that you'll get started soon, because I promise you, you'll have great returns.